On May 7, 2023, in the quiet, early morning hours, specifically just after 1 a.m., local authorities in Greenwood, South Carolina, were dispatched to investigate a reported road accident. The location was a remote and secluded dead-end street, a place not often disturbed. Upon arrival, the first responders quickly recognized the potential gravity of the situation. The initial assessment suggested more than just a simple accident. "Start roping this off," one of the first officers on the scene likely instructed, their voice cutting through the still night air. "Because this is going to be a crime scene." This initial assessment was a crucial step, ensuring the integrity of any potential evidence. Their investigation soon led them to the edge of the nearby woods. It was there, amidst the trees and shadows, that they made a grim discovery: the body of 46-year-old Davis McClendon. His presence confirmed their initial fears. This was more than a fender bender. However, the immediate focus was on what lay on the road itself, the immediate aftermath of whatever had occurred. Obvious signs of a collision were readily apparent. Scattered across the asphalt were remnants of the incident: a shirt, a shoe, and a heavily damaged sedan. The vehicle bore testament to the violence of the impact, with significant damage clearly visible on the fender. Investigators determined it to be a BMW 5 Series, very similar to the one being used to visually demonstrate the positioning of the vehicle at the crime scene. The demonstration allowed investigators to consider the possible angles and trajectory of the vehicle. Once the first responders had secured the area, preventing any unauthorized access and ensuring the preservation of the scene, Greenwood County Sheriff's Office investigator Patrick Durkin arrived. His primary task was to meticulously document the scene, capturing every detail through photographs. These images would serve as a permanent record, crucial for later analysis and reconstruction of the events that had transpired. The front driver's side wheel of the BMW was turned slightly, a seemingly insignificant detail that could potentially hold crucial clues. Whatever series of events had unfolded at this deserted crossroads, Durkin's job was to essentially freeze it in time, preserving every element for later scrutiny. The initial assessment by first responders suggested that Davis McClendon's injuries were consistent with having been struck by a vehicle. However, the puzzle was incomplete, as no other vehicle seemingly involved in the collision was present at the scene. The body of Davis McClendon was found approximately 50 feet away from the damaged BMW. This distance was immediately significant, leading investigators to suspect that he had been outside his car at the time he was struck. The weather conditions were also noted. Fortunately, there was no rain or any other environmental factor that would potentially wash away or degrade any evidence, which aided investigators. "So, the main thing I focused on was the vehicle," Durkin later explained, highlighting the importance of the BMW as a central piece of the puzzle. During his examination of the car, Durkin says he noticed some strange and unusual damage to the vehicle. This damage appeared inconsistent with a typical low-speed collision. "Usually when you'd think of a normal fender bender. It would just kind of be pressed into it," he elaborated. "And this was torn back like a tuna can in a sense." The unusual nature of the damage immediately raised concerns among the authorities, leading them to wonder if the incident was simply a hit and run or something far more sinister. Contributing to the mystery, the vehicle's airbags had been deployed, indicating a significant impact. Adding another layer to the puzzle was the presence of a phone, lying conspicuously on the front passenger seat. As Durkin continued his meticulous examination of the area, he observed additional debris scattered on the road. However, none of these fragments appeared to be particularly informative or revealing on their own. The prevailing initial assumption was that Davis McClendon had been struck by a vehicle, a theory that needed to be substantiated through further investigation. Investigator Ronnie Powell, also from the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office, joined the investigation. He explained that authorities had gained valuable insights by speaking with two women who were present at the scene, Meredith Haney and Megan McGovern. It was Megan McGovern who had placed the crucial 911 call, alerting authorities to the situation. Megan often babysat for Meredith's 3 children, establishing a connection and explaining their presence at the scene. Both women provided detailed statements, recounting what they had seen and the events that had unfolded throughout the night leading up to the incident. Their accounts were crucial in establishing a timeline and background to the events. The investigators were particularly interested in Meredith's account. What did Meredith say became a central question in the early stages of the investigation. She pretty much gave a summary of the whole backstory that she had been dating Davis, an investigator may have noted. Meredith had told authorities that Davis had left a club they had been at earlier that night. According to her statement, Davis had called her only minutes later from the road. He told her that he was parked at the intersection of Avid Road and Sawgrass Place, a seemingly innocuous detail that would later become a critical piece of the investigative puzzle. When he'd put her on hold and then failed to come back on the line, Meredith was worried and got a ride there from Megan. It was Megan, the babysitter, who'd gotten out of her car and was the first to see Davis' body. That news must have been stunning. Yeah, it was devastating. It was crushing. Davis McClendon was the ultimate people person without an enemy in the world, say his friends Chip Funderburk. Everybody loved Davis. He was just awesome. Zach Calhoun. He loved Big. And Johnny Coates. And what Zach said, he was everyone's best friend. He loved everyone. But none of them could remember Davis ever mentioning the specifics of his love life. Not until he met Meredith Haney. He told me that he had met somebody and they had just kind of been chatting and, enjoying getting to know each other. It seemed like a good thing. Seemed like a positive thing for sure. Calhoun says Davis had gone through a divorce, but the end of his marriage hadn't done anything to weaken his devotion as a father and a friend, even to the residents of the retirement home where he worked. He was the most empathetic person I've ever met. More than 4 months before Davis died, on the night of December 23rd, 2022, Meredith was at that club, celebrating her 39th birthday with her best friends. She says they were wearing their worst Christmas sweaters when the handsome stranger struck up a conversation. Then, I think he texted on Christmas Day, and then the next day, and then the next. And you just kept on talking? Until meeting Davis, she says she'd been keeping her head down. Just about 6 months earlier, she had left her husband of 10 years, a local auto body shop owner named Bud Ackerman, and she was struggling to balance parenting their 3 kids and her job as a grammar school teacher. She says she knew getting involved with someone new would not be easy. Was there any hesitancy about moving forward with this? There was. She says, first, Davis wanted to make sure. She had no intention of reconciling her marriage. He didn't want to be the reason that, we didn't get our family back together. So we made sure from the get-go that that wasn't going to be an issue. And it just happened. They would have less than 6 months together. Could you start to guess what may have happened? How it was hit? The night of Davis' death at the site, investigator Patrick Durkin noticed something beyond the strangeness of the crashed car and Davis' distance from it. There was an oil slick in the road. It's still here. Just over a year later, it's still here. But there was a number of footprints and some tire tracks. And what did that tell you when you saw it? Well, we knew that there was some type of impact to the vehicle. And then we knew there was, oil and tire marks that left from here. It looked like evidence from the vehicle that hit Davis. You guys are looking around and you realize the oil continues? See, It was very obvious that there was tire marks that had gone back down the road and kind of turned around back where the tire tracks seemed to show a vehicle had turned around. Investigators had found oil spatters on a streetlight post. It was about maybe this high, and from there was a trail of oil that had led down the road into the distance. It's breadcrumbs. Basically, in a manner of speaking, you know, we just have to do the investigation and see what evidence is there and see where it leads us to. There was a trail that led from the incident location. Investigator Ronnie Powell says by the time authorities started following that oil trail from the crash site, they had a solid hunch where it might lead. Davis McClendon's girlfriend, Meredith Haney, had told them she'd suspected where he had been going when he left her at the bar that night to meet her estranged husband, Bud Ackerman. And it turns out the oily evidence led right to Ackerman's parents' house. Garage is open. He'd been living there since separating from Meredith about a year earlier. Sheriff's office? Yes, sir. Authorities' body cameras were rolling. He kind of walked up, and almost was expecting us. Bud Ackerman and his father were both standing near the garage. Are there some kids here? Yeah. Okay. Whose kids are they? Mine. Yours and who? My wife. Okay. Bud had spent the day with his 3 kids at a local festival. He and his wife Meredith had a custody arrangement, and it was his night with the kids. But in the driveway, authorities noticed his white Ford F-250 pickup. That's wild with oil leaking from the undercarriage. They also noticed a crack in the grille and other evidence that suggested the vehicle had hit someone. That's a poem, Mark. Investigators turned to Bud. Do you have your ID on you? I do not. Okay, just step over here for me. Authorities say Bud told them he would not answer questions without his lawyer present. But from speaking with Meredith, they learned she had a contentious relationship with her soon-to-be ex-husband and came to suspect a jealous Bud Ackerman had mowed Davis McClendon down. Looking at the scene, they deduced Davis had been standing outside his BMW, as shown in the CBS News animation based on their investigation. They suspect Bud's pickup truck sideswiped the sedan and hit Davis, carrying him on the vehicle's grill and depositing his body across the road. Meredith says Bud had been upset since reaching out to her days earlier when he found out she was dating Davis. He texted me. What did he text you? He said something about, Meredith, how could you? What was your reaction to that text? I think it was hurt, like I felt bad. Because I just don't like to hurt people's feelings. I don't like people to be hurt. So I felt bad. What had begun years earlier as a promising marriage that would bear 3 kids had fallen apart. He was a good father. He was a really good dad. Bud was from a prominent local family, and he was a business owner. But Meredith says his work had become stressful. I started to notice some depression and things like that, that I've never seen before. She says he started drinking a lot, and the more he drank, she says, the more unpredictable he became. There was screaming, cussing. You felt threatened. Absolutely. Meredith says he never laid a hand on her, but destroyed her sense of self. The house was never clean enough. There were never enough groceries. It was so loud and vulgar, it was very degrading. Then, she says, she noticed her husband was starting to become paranoid. She remembers being in her closet one day and noticing a strange pillow. He had cut a hole in it. According to Meredith, there was a hidden camera inside. And then I started finding more of them. What other places did you find cameras? There was one hidden in our dresser that faced the bed, found one in a bush in the front yard, and you put them in all the kids' rooms. She says that was the last straw. They separated in the spring of 2022. I could breathe. I could be me again. Meredith says the separation seemed to help Bud to that. He'd stopped drinking and kept going to church with her and the kids. Yeah, but by then, she decided it was too late. When I was done, I was done. And starting again with someone new seemed like a distant dream, Meredith says. Until that night, Davis McClendon sauntered up and sat down in her life. They tried to keep things low-key at first. Meredith says she never wanted to rub Bud's nose in it. So what did you all do? We would go out of town. But Meredith says they knew they couldn't sneak around forever. And it had started seeming like her new relationship with Davis was a forever kind of thing. We talked about sitting on the porch, rocking chairs at 80, and it was just a different kind of relationship. But after Bud found out, there were new complications. He accused you of cheating. Yeah, even though you were weeks away from your divorce. Right. Meredith says Bud actually called Davis and asked him to back off until the divorce was official. What was Davis' reaction to that request? I think he agreed, but then we talked about it and decided that was just giving him another little piece of control. And on the night Davis died, she says, Bud seemed out of control back at his parents' house. Investigators now had a warrant and were finding more clues that Ackerman had. Been at the crash site. Oily footprints at about 6:30 a.m. on May 7th, 2023. But Ackerman was arrested. He would be charged with the murder of Davis McClendon. We think there's enough evidence at the scene to prove of what occurred. So by the end of the night, you already have someone in custody. Yes! What's left to do? That's just the beginning because it turns out but Ackerman did have a story to tell. He says Davis was standing near the middle of a dark road approximately shown in the CBS News animation. Bud says he didn't see Davis until it was too late that hitting him had been an accident. And Bud's team says they can prove it. Investigators are confident they could prove Bud Ackerman's trunk had hit and killed Davis McClendon, but they knew proving Ackerman had done it on purpose might be harder. Building a case starts from that night. And when investigators looked at that night, they learned Bud Ackerman had been tracking Davis and Meredith's whereabouts for hours. He was trying to find them that night. Was not happy about this whole situation using security video, phone records, and even data from Bud's own truck. Authorities built a timeline. They began with Meredith's phone, Lieutenant Matthew Womack of the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office. We were able to extract the information, such as the calls and the texts, a slew of calls and text messages. Bud had made to Meredith leading up to the collision at 8:54 p.m. Bud texted Meredith, "Why do you hate me?" "I just don't understand." She doesn't respond to him. She's out with Davis at a local restaurant. "We went to dinner, at Break on the Lake." You see Davis and Meredith, having dinner, and being interrupted by Bud's attempts to reach her. What was the FaceTime conversation like? Where are you? Who are you with? Why are you doing this to me? Did you tell him where you were? I feel like it, at some point in the conversation, either he could tell where I was because of what's around me, or I finally did tell him. It was one or the other. So at that point, he knows that you're out with Davis? While Meredith continued her date with Davis, security cameras catch Bud Ackerman at 10:40 p.m., arriving at a popular Greenwood club called Key West. You could see Bud, he's talking to people, interacting, consuming alcohol. The video shows Bud spent about an hour and a half at Key West, then called Meredith again. How did he sound on the phone? Intoxicated. What's an intoxicated Bud sound like? Vulgar. Soon after midnight, Ackerman had left Key West. About a half hour later, cameras show Bud's truck circling in front of Break on the Lake. But by then, Meredith and Davis were no longer at the restaurant. You can see his vehicle drive through the parking lot. It's looking for him. Lieutenant Womack says before long investigators would learn just how far Bud Ackerman had gone that night to find Meredith and Davis. Though Ackerman himself wasn't talking, critical information would emerge from another digital witness. His truck. It's a box about this big that goes into the backside of the dash. Womack says in some cars and trucks, The infotainment systems, as they're known, store detailed information about how the vehicles are being driven. We're in a similar model to Bud's Ford F-250 pickup. So on Bud's vehicle, they were able to pull a significant amount of information. This is just a little snippet. You're talking just in a 24-hour time period, it's over 3,000 events, including snap measurements of speed, acceleration, and brake pressure. Bud's onboard computer even pinged public Wi-Fi's. It passed. Investigators learned that Bud had actually driven by Meredith's house and onto Davis McClendon Street that night. But while he was driving around looking for them, ironically, they had moved to the Key West club he had just left. When Davis decides to call Bud, he walked out the back of the bar. It was 12:51 a.m. A few minutes passed, and I went out there to check on him. He was gone. Did he think he could bring the temperature down? Davis called her minutes later. And what was that conversation? Where are you? And that's when he told me that he was going to meet Biden. Womack says other infotainment system data show that at a bit past 1 in the morning, Davis and Bud had their fatal encounter. And we can tell there was actually an event at 1:11 a.m. on May the 7th. They say Ackerman hit the brakes hard. We can narrow it down to tenths of seconds of when the collision occurred. And according to the computer, seconds after the collision, Ackerman's truck had stopped. At that point in time, Bud's opened in the door. He opens the door before he shifts it to park. Womack thinks Ackerman got out of his truck, which was probably leaking from the collision. Remember that puddle of oil in the road near the victim? Then he closes the door, then he gets back in. And then it's shifted to drive at that point in time. Then, say authorities, Ackerman turns his truck around near the lamppost. Roughly, as you see in the CBS News demonstration based on their investigation, he then drives away, leaking an oil trail all the way to his parents' driveway. Right here his phone becomes unavailable. The ignition turned off and it disconnected from his device. What does that tell you? That's when he got home and got out. It started to paint a very clear picture. But Ackerman's attorney Jack Swerling paints a different picture. I don't think he intended to run Davis McClendon over. There's no indication that he's aggressive or violent individual. Sheriff's office nor says Swerling. Is there much to indicate his client was drunk that night? Can I get you to step with me over here for me, please? None of the cops who arrested him reported. He seemed tipsy. The only one who said he was intoxicated was Meredith. Was he stalking them that night? I think he was trying to find out, confirmed that they were together. He wanted to talk to her. According to Swerling, Meredith and Davis had betrayed McClendon's promise to Bud to stand down until the Ackerman's marriage was officially over. She couldn't wait another month, and she's out with this guy and she's cheating on her husband. They are still legally married. South Carolina law calls out adultery, and Swerling says the night Davis died, he let Bud Ackerman's repeated calls and text messages to Meredith get under his skin. Yeah, Davis got upset about it, and that's what led to them having this meeting. But it was thought they were going to meet and talk, he says, but had suggested an innocent and safe place for it to happen. They were supposed to meet at Bud's parents' house, which is about half a mile from that location. Swerling says Ackerman's children were sleeping there that night, so attacking Davis would have been the last thing on his client's mind. You wouldn't meet at your parents' house if you were angry and threatening and ready to kill somebody. He says it was Davis who selected the deserted intersection as a new location. And remember how Davis was found without his shirt on that night? Well, Swerling says he believes Davis took it off to prepare for a confrontation. He was ready to fight. Swerling insists Bud Ackerman meant no harm that night, and Bud is about to tell that story to a jury. Your name? William Gray Ackerman, Jr. Also goodbye, Bud. Good morning, everybody. We are on the record in the State versus William Bud Ackerman. Prosecutors are determined to prove it was no accident that Bud Ackerman hit Davis McClendon the night he died. So in September of 2024, Assistant Attorney General John Conrad and John Matters. He drove his car into the body of Davis McClendon. Start the case off with a bang. Bam. And that's what this case is about. They'll argue Ackerman couldn't stand the fact that his estranged wife was seeing someone and Bud was searching for Meredith and Davis all over town. Bud Ackerman was not going to let Davis McClendon be with Meredith. That's your house right there. Yes, sir. Metters and Conrad lead with their strongest evidence. There are actually time-stamped videos from the neighbors' doorbell cameras at the moment of the crash that killed Davis. It shows what they say is Bud's Ford F-250 driving through the frame. Seconds later on the video, what sounds like a crash. And seconds after that, a series of muffled sounds. What did you hear? I heard somebody yelling. Prosecutors argue it's Bud Ackerman's voice yelling at Davis McClendon after running him down. What it sounded like to me was, "What do you want to talk about now?" Bud's yelling unheavenly expertise, said to Davis as he was lying on the ground. I think he was glad he was dead, but Ackerman's defense attorney Jack Swerling argues the audio is too garbled to prove anything. I've listened to it several times now and well, I don't believe you could conclude 100% that that is exactly what he said. The prosecutor then calls Megan McGovern, the Ackerman's babysitter and friend, to describe the moment she'd seen Davis's body through traumatized teenage eyes. He had blood coming out of his ears and his nose, and I'm not exactly sure if it was coming out of his mouth or not, because there's just blood everywhere from his nose and everything. But their star witness is the woman at the center of both men's affection, Meredith Haney, who testifies with the date night security videos as a guide. Is that you? Yes, sir. She tells the jury Bud Ackerman called her when she and Davis were at break on the lake. Did you think he was trying to find you? I did worry, yes. And kept calling after they got to Key West Club. Is that a call from the defendant, Bud Ackerman? Yes, sir. Did you reject that call? Yes. It's 18 seconds later. You get another call. Yes, sir. Well, what did you think about all these calls coming in? I was getting very frustrated and angry. And it was getting obsessive. It was getting scary. And she says, by the time Davis McClendon left her at the Key West Club after midnight. And is that Davis McClendon leaving the bar? Yes. She was worried Bud might be volatile. So when Davis later called to tell her he was going to meet with Ackerman, she says she wanted to go check on the situation in person, and makes clear to the jury that when she saw the scene, she had little doubt who killed her boyfriend. I dove back into Meg's car because I thought that the only way that Bud would have ever killed somebody would have been to shoot her. Objection. The judge sustains the defense's objection, but Meredith continues. I was scared that he was still out there. Okay, Mr. Swirling, any cross-examination? All right, go for it. Step down, ma'am. Your Honor, the state calls Special Agent Brian Hudak. Digital forensics expert Brian Hudak tells the jury about data in the infotainment system of Ackerman's pickup, including some that show, but was driving in exactly the right place in Greenwood at the intersection of Avid and Sawdust at exactly the right time between 1:11:31 and 1:11:32 to be implicated in the deadly collision. He suggests they can even tell the moment of impact. There's something that causes this truck to decelerate very quickly. Correct? Correct. And who'd access the evidence shows Ackerman was going 25 miles per hour. In the amount of detail that truck had on what Bud did that night is simply breathtaking. A Ford vehicle's completely on the wrong side of the road when it strikes the BMW. Collision reconstruction expert Corporal Christopher Bratcher testifies the dents show Bud's speeding pickup sideswiped Davis BMW sedan, as shown in that CBS News animation based on the prosecution's theory. They say Bud was aiming at Davis, who was standing near the driver's door when he was hit, and that the truck kept going with Davis on the grill until he fell off where authorities found him. But Jack Swirling argues much of the same evidence shows hitting Davis was an accident. We maintain that Mr. Ackerman did not act intentionally in this case. He says, but Ackerman had no idea Davis was standing outside his car, and calls auto forensics expert Jonathan Nelson to testify that given Ackerman's speed in the dark over a slope in the road and into the parked BMW's headlight beams, he wouldn't have seen Davis McClendon standing in the road until at most 2.5 seconds before the collision. Would a person have sufficient opportunity to avoid impact? I think most people would have little to no opportunity to begin to try to avoid. And Swirling says Davis wasn't standing right next to his car when he was hit, but further out towards the center of the road. And that Ackerman swerved to his left into the BMW to get around him. As shown in the CBS News animation based on the defense's theory, he's trying to avoid hitting him. Wouldn't you swerve the other way? Why he didn't go right? I can't answer that. Swirling knows there may be only one person who can. I have a call about Bud Ackerman. All right, come around to the stand please, sir. Ackerman's attorney begins by trying to show the jury his client was Meredith's long-suffering but devoted husband. Did you love her? I did very much. He admits he was angry at Meredith, but says he only wanted to talk to her, and agreed to meet Davis to talk to him too. Do you have any intention to hurt him? I deny. Ackerman says he hadn't realized how fast he was going, and that he was only trying to pull up next to Davis to talk, and didn't see McClendon standing in the road until the last moment. What action did you take, if any, to avoid hitting the person? I jerked my truck as hard as I could to the left to try to hit his car to stop the motion of my truck from going forward. But on cross-examination, he admits something that undercuts his claims of innocence that night. He had never called 911. I panicked. He panicked. Instead, he left the scene and drove to his parents' house and told them what had happened. But they never called authorities either. I've seen so many people react in abnormal ways. In all the cases I've handled, I've come to expect those kind of things. In closings, Prosecutor Meadows argues Ackerman is a murderer with a truck as his weapon. This might as well be a drive-by shooting with a gun. And he says the Ford pickup's infotainment system proves it. This is Bud Frank. This is malice. This is intent. The state has not proven that Mr. Ackerman acted with malice or with the intent. It's the highest possible bar, and the defense insists the state has not proven its case. Mr. Ackerman is entitled to a verdict of not guilty. This is Judgment Day. It's verdict day. You never know what a jury's gonna do. You got 12 people making the decision. Have you reached a verdict in this case? Ladies and gentlemen, it's my understanding that the jury has reached a verdict. For the Ackerman jury, 6 days of testimony and evidence boiled down to a deliberation less than a half-hour long. State of South Carolina versus William Gray Bud Ackerman. Did you have a feeling about what that verdict might be? Yes. Yeah. A quick verdict like that is not good. Not good. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty. Bud Ackerman is guilty of the murder of Davis McClendon. It was the right verdict. I mean, I thought it would be fast. Not that fast. Not just fast. But too fast to be thought through, says Bud Ackerman's attorney Jack Swirling. I don't think the jury considered everything that was presented to him. They didn't need a lot of time to stew over the evidence. The evidence was clear and obvious. Damning evidence of what Bud Ackerman did say Davis McClendon's friends, and equally damning evidence they say of what Bud Ackerman never did. Our friend laid there in the road. They still can't wrap their head around why nobody in the Ackerman family ever called 911. Somebody should have done the right thing. At sentencing, right after the verdict, Davis McClendon's son demands accountability from the Ackermans. It is time for this spoiled, evil individual and this spoiled, evil family in Greenwood, to finally gain some repercussions for their actions. Thank you. Lots been said about why we didn't call 911. But Ackerman's father tries to explain his own lack of action by saying he was too disoriented to know what to do at that hour of the night when his son woke him with the news. The judge's sentence is devastating to the defendant. Mr. Ackerman, if you please answer. Sentence of the court is Mr. Ackerman. You be committed to the State Department Corrections period of 45 years. It looks like the end of the road for Bud Ackerman. I know that where he is where he's supposed to be, but it may allow for a new beginning for Meredith Haney. I was worried that if he only got 5 or 10 years that I'd never get to start a new life, because I might be scared for when he got out with their father, unlikely to get out of prison for decades. She's determined to spare her children from the impact of that horrible night. As a single mom, she leans on friends and family. How are the kids doing? Well, my kids are looking back. She believes, but Ackerman really wanted to target her that night, and that she's only alive because he found Davis McClendon first. Davis saved my life. You really feel that way? Absolutely. If true, Meredith Haney owes her life, however challenging, to the new man she had once hoped to share it with. How would you like Davis to be remembered? As a hero, for the way he treated people, for his empathy, for his heart. He was just a good person. CBS next Saturday, a soldier suspected of killing his young wife. He's been trained on how to kill. Goes on the run. He just disappeared off the face of the map with his 17-year-old girlfriend. If he was willing to kill his own wife, there's no telling what kind of danger Hannah Thompson would have been in. 48 Hours is all new. CBS next Saturday, 10, 9 Central, and streaming on Paramount.